find out you collect vintage kit, they translate that into Technology Recycling Center. Well, this can be a bit of a downer, of course. You imagine yourself as a discerning collector of classic design icons, and your mates rock up with a broken fax machine that they're sure you're going to love. It hurts to be so misunderstood. Oh, sure, you're going to smile and say how special you think it is through gritted teeth. But if it doesn't end up immediately at the council recycling point, it ends up at the back of some closet shelf, keeping the dust bunnies company. However, occasionally, then, as years go by, your discerning tastes change, they evolve, or you have a revelation. Oh, hey, you say to yourself, that sounds neat. I wonder if I still have the one I stowed away. Perhaps that's never going to happen with a broken fax machine, but how about a seminal or just peculiar laptop? So the story goes, a friend gave me his old notebook computer without floppy or power supply. Several house moves later, I pulled it out for a second look. It's like rediscovering a book that you were given at Christmas and never read. Well, this is my forgotten book, an Omnibook from HP. I was in the trade when these things were on the market. I thought they were peculiar, and not in a good way. Looking them up, years later, it appears the contemporary press disagreed with me. This thing is called a sub-notebook. It's a machine that makes a design compromise in order to add lightness. 2.1 kilograms of lightness in this case. Of course, that's nothing now, not in the current lightness sweepstakes, but the perennial pursuit of thinner and lighter is nothing new. As in auto racing, the lightness objective has driven a lot of innovation. Some of it useful, some of it, like the keyboard and the current MacBooks, an acquired taste with an allergy to crumbs. This Teardown series will occasionally venture into this territory of sub-notebooks. All the major makers offered one. IBM had the 110, 200, and 500 series, not to mention the seminal 701. Toshiba had the Protege, and this Omnibook was Hewlett-Packard's entry. The Omnibook story starts in 1993 with a 300 that used the same form, but with a 386 and a grayscale screen. It weighed a mere 1.4 kilograms. The machine contained Windows software and ROM and did all of its storage as PCMCIA cards. Well, for its day, it had fabulous battery life, reported 9 hours using flash disks. Compare that to the machine I was using in 1993, This is a 1989 luggable Tandem LT386. Struggles to get 60 minutes on a battery when new, and the bathroom scale says it's 4.9 kilograms. HP continues to update their offering while keeping the basic design the same. Their very last release in this range was the 800 CT in 1996, and that's this machine. It could be had with 100 MHz, 133 or 166 MHz Pentium. The last had the MMX optional instruction set. The basic system had 16 megabytes of RAM. Standard hard disks were 772 and 1.3, and on that they stuffed a dual boot Windows 3.1 Windows 95 image. Across the back you get a 1024 by 768 capable VGA port. Next to it is the socket for the external floppy. Then there's the standard RS-232 serial port. The dark plastic cover is an infrared port capable of 115K transfer speeds. Then you have a bidirectional parallel port, and finally there's the port replicator interface. That one's a bit special because it's actually doubling up as a SCSI 2 interface. Yep, this machine has onboard SCSI. And for the youth, just imagine stuffing some server-grade I/O into an iPad. Around this side, you've got Sound Blaster Pro standard audio jacks, and then there's the standard for the time PCMCIA card slot pair. Open it up and you have a keyboard using more or less full-size keys, and that onboard screen is 800 by 600 TFT color. What made this Omnibook unique was its dead end of a pointing device, the tethered micro mouse. Yeah, it'd be cute if it wasn't so quaintly ridiculous. Do please tell me how wrong I am in the comments. I'd love to know. Enough chatter. Let's pull it apart and see what's inside. Over to the workbench. Starting with the battery, that's set flush in the base of the machine. We need that out of the way. The RAM upgrade is up front under a dedicated hatch. Now, this machine has a Kingston 64 megabyte kit made up of two 32 megabyte boards lashed together. Taken along with the 16 megabytes in the motherboard, that makes 80 total. There are 9 screws on the base of the machine. The 2 in the middle on either side hold the keyboard down. Beware the 2 at the back, however, they hold the screen on, and I should probably have left them in whilst I was getting the keyboard out. So back up on top, we need to lift the keyboard forward from the back. you'll find 2 ribbon cables up front. You can already see some evidence of trouble here. I guess that's spillage in aisle 800. The top case is held in place by the screws in the middle. Before you prise that off, you need to extract the hard drive. On the evidence, I'm thinking this was a Coca-Cola incident. That plastic sleeve around the drive should come out with it. Unfortunately, it appears to be adhered to the metallized paint on the inside of the case. If you look closely, you can see the hard drive connector shows some evidence of the spillage too. I need to get the screen out of the way. There are 2 flat flexes passing through that aperture at the back right, signal and power. These just pop out of their socket. Front and center is the CPU daughter card. That should just pop out too. On the underside of the shielding at the top, you can see a smudgy bit. And that's where there should be a thermal wax patch. That shield then doubles up as a heatsink. The thermal compound connects the CPU to the shield. The CPU is behind that casting on the bottom center of this board. This machine uses a simple passive cooling approach without heat pipes, radiators, or fans. However, it does use CPU throttling to maintain the heat envelope. Thermal design aside, the other reason to have a separate CPU board is to allow maximum reuse of components. All the 800s will probably use the same motherboard. If we flip the daughter card over, we can see the CPU is pretty hidden behind a heavy heatsink. I don't see a non-destructive way of pulling that apart, so we'll have to use our imaginations. What should be down there is a Pentium 166 MMX. Above the CPU is the cache controller. L2 cache was introduced with Pentiums, so this chip is bridging in the L2 cache memory. The SRAM for the L2 cache is over here. The machine's 512K of L2 cache is made up of these 2 chips. To connect the processor into the rest of the machine, we have a CPU to PCI bridge chip over here. Let's set the processor board aside and focus on the main board. There are a number of connections to undo here. The big ribbon is for the ports at the back of the case. On the right, you have the ribbon cable connecting the mouse. I also need to get these audio connections out of the way. One leads over to the microphone, that just lifts out. The other is for the speaker. The board is slotted into these channels at the back. It should lift out with a little wiggling. One interesting design note. I expected to see CMOS and backup batteries somewhere here. This is a vintage computer owner's burden, the hidden motherboard corruptor. But this HP doesn't seem to have any at all, and yet its spec allows you 30 seconds to change the main battery. Not sure how they were doing that. So let's look at the other key devices making up this machine. On the naked board front and center, you have a TI card bus controller. That's what drives the PC cards this system was originally built around. Heading north, there are 4 IBM chips. These guys are 2 megabytes of EDO DRAM apiece, so 8 megabytes. There are another 4 on the other side, making up a total of 16. Heading west, you have a PCI to PCI bridge chip, so multiple buses on the system. Next over from that, you have the audio chip. That's an ESS Audio Drive 1887. It's a Sound Blaster Pro compatible, so that means 16-bit stereo. There's a 20-voice synthesizer as well. On the eastern end, you get the PCI to ISA bridge. Next to it is the flash RAM for the BIOS. And one further to the right is the NeoMagic graphics adapter. On the mainboard flip side, got the SymBIOS Logic SCSI controller. The port may be fudged, but it's got the right hardware. Over in the middle, you have the VLSI infrared port controller. And just next to that, you have an Altera FPGA. This is an EPF 8000 series device. Down along the port edge of the board, you have a serial driver, Linear Technology LTC 1347, and then you have a DC to DC converter for battery output, I believe. That's all the big stuff. Plenty of glue chips as well. Let's take another look at the case bottom. This is the lair of HP's pet rat on a lead. Again, we have the remnants of cola splashed around on the shielding. Now, if I waggle this around a bit so you can see how the bits fit together, imagine the pivot was stable. It's located into the motherboard, so just now it's floating free. Let me just remove the pivot and pop the mylar out of the way. There's a clip holding the tether in place. To get the mouse out, you need to hold that back and withdraw it. Then we can take a closer look at it. As far as I know, no other laptop mouse ever worked like this. It's actually the tether that does the work. There's an X encoder in the plastic sleeve through which the tether passes, and then the Y encoder is in that arcing bit of mylar there. I had a good look at the screen, intending to tear it down as well, but it appears to be bonded together. didn't fancy re-gluing it all, so we'll leave its innards to the realms of the imagination too. We need to do some tidying up before we put it back together and test it all out. The Mylar shields are easy enough to clean, as there's a bit of soap and water. However, a little attention needs to be paid to the hard drive connectors. That took a little toothbrushing. The bottom of the hard drive looked like it might have gotten doused, so I decided to put it on a separate rig to see if I could get an image out of it first. It's got a fair amount of age-related rattles and groans. It's not original either. It should be a 1.34 gigabyte. Instead, it's a 5. Just for chuckles, of course, I used a distant descendant to do this job. Once that finished, it all went back together pretty well. I didn't get a power supply with it, so I had to cobble up a cable for my bench supply. In the fullness of time, it finally came up with a Windows 2000 login prompt. I think we'll have to call that a success. So my unwanted present turned out to be a perfectly functional design classic after all. Now all I have to do is get a floppy, power supply, fresh battery, reimage the drive, for which I have no password, dig out a thermal paste tube, and locate the missing rear door. It'll be as good as new. Hope you enjoyed this video. Lots more teardowns and vintage computing to come on Beige-o-Vision. Subscribe to get notifications of when new videos are posted, and if you like this video, thumbs up please.